All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar for this evening. Tonight, we are joined by Sarah Strong again, the trail therapist. She's becoming a regular on our series here. And I'm stoked. We had a great conversation a couple weeks ago, and we've got this one tonight on the runner's brain, and then another couple that are scheduled for later in the summer, which is fun. So this was actually, I think, our biggest registration numbers ahead of time. We had about 50 people sign up for this webinar, which is very exciting. So I know we'll have some people tuning in live. Others will be catching the recording on our YouTube and website and whatever other platforms we've got this on. So, but tonight we're going to be talking about the runner's brain. So we put the call out ahead of time for questions from you guys when you did registration. So we've got those in a Google Doc that Sarah and I are going to be referencing throughout the evening. And we're just slowly make our way through as many questions as we can. We're going to be mindful of time, try to keep it within an hour or less. And we can always continue the convo on another webinar. But Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the webinar tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. I always love chatting with you, and the questions are always so wonderful, and I'm excited to dive into them tonight.
Awesome. Well, like we've done for other webinars, I think it's helpful just to give, for you to give a short little background on who you are, who is the trail therapist, and then we can jump into some of the questions for tonight.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Sarah Strong. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a certified ultra running coach based out of Colorado, kind of between Boulder and Golden and Denver. And I work both as a therapist and a coach, so supporting athletes as runners and humans. And that's the same thing. Sometimes we forget as runners that we're humans. And so I really do a lot of work on helping runners prioritize their mental health and focus on mindset for racing and competing.
And you are an ultra runner yourself. And we were chatting before we pressed the live button. You've got a huge event coming up. Do you want to share what that is?
I'm running the High Lonesome 100 next Friday, which is a 100-miler through the Sawatch Mountain area range here in Colorado. So it's just like a big mountain ultra, which is, I just feel super lucky to be out on these beautiful high alpine trails while the wildflowers are blooming, and super excited about it.
Yeah, all your training pictures you've been posting I've been like salivating looking at all the scenery and the high country. And I know you put a couple calls out for pacers, and I have a buddy of mine in Zoom Vermont 100 that weekend, which I'm already committed to. Otherwise, I would be on a plane out there.
Next time.
Call to do some pacing.
Yeah, I'm trying to embrace that. Like, maybe I'm not meant to be paced. I've done 100 without being paced before. And when I think back on my best races, like these kind of sections that I find myself wanting a pacer for were actually like I've done well on my own when I'm just sort of grinding it out. And so I think I'm just trying to embrace that that's what I'm supposed to discover in the High Lonesome part of the High Lonesome Trail is like, doing it on my own. So
totally. I mean, and that might come up tonight that, not everybody, it's a good fit to be a pacer. Not saying that you aren't, but I know I've talked to friends who, they've tried having a pacer and it just is it's not a good drive, which is interesting. Everybody's different.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, let's hop into the first question. I'm going to pop it up here on the screen. And these are in no particular order, just how they came in through registration. So first question, which I think will bring an interesting conversation, is what strategies do you have for keeping, quote, sane during ultras? And, when we were talking about this, we kind of asked the question, well, what does sane even mean? What does that mean? So
right. Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer because I don't know what sane means. And like, I think about Courtney Dauwalter, for example, like sort of famously sharing some of her hallucinations in the middle of some longer races. And I think we could argue that in those moments, she's not sane. Certainly she's having some psychosis or some parts of her brain she's not tapping into, or maybe she's is tapping into. But, so like, what are we going for? Like, is it bad to hallucinate? Is it bad to detach from reality? Is it bad to kind of experience some of those things? Or is that okay? Right. And so if that's sane, I would sort of challenge that, or I wonder a little bit about that. And I love the comment. I think ultra runners are insane. That could be, that's a whole other topic. But then if being sane means I want to make mindful choices. I want to be in touch with my feelings and thoughts as I'm racing so that I'm not overwhelmed, so that emotions aren't guiding it, right? Like that to me is perhaps what that question is. Like, how do I make sure in the middle of the race that I'm not making a knee-jerk reaction or giving into the emotions? And so if that's the question, I think we'll talk a lot tonight about some of those strategies for being present and grounding and sort of connecting to ourselves in the moment so that we can be aware of the emotions, but that the emotions aren't the ones in control. We're factoring them in. But I wonder if you have other thoughts about what sane could be, or.
It's a good question. I mean, not knowing who asked this and what the context is, I wonder if maybe the person's wondering, like, maybe it could be their first ultra and their only context is from what they've heard from other people or what they've seen on social media. So maybe they're thinking like, "Ooh, I don't want to be like that person or have that type of an experience." But I mean, something that I think comes up every webinar, whether it's talking with you or our friends at Chaos Crewing, is, and I know this will come up a lot, is like there's work that can be done ahead of time in order to put yourself in a place that you want to be. So I think just this person asking this question is probably like a really good starting point of like, well, what do you really like? What do you want the race to look like? Like, what's your goal for the race, which you just touched on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that piece of kind of to your point, the things that we're doing ahead of time and the training that we're doing ahead of time to, maybe it's just some of that reflection and thoughts, having a race goal, having a strategy, knowing what we want. But then it's the things like mindfulness practice and self-awareness practice and emotional regulation practice, so that in the middle of the race, when we feel ourselves, like I was telling you, when I had a couple weeks ago, laying in the fetal position, crying on the side of the trail, hating my life.
It happened.
It happens, right? And then I had my moment. I felt my feelings, took care of my basic needs, and then I'm able to move on. And it's learning how to not fear the emotions, but make space for them in a productive way. And so I think there are other questions along that will allow us to dive in a little bit deeper. But I think that question of how do I stay sane, it comes down to like knowing yourself and knowing those signs that you're dysregulated, that you are kind of disconnecting from that space, and then knowing how to bring it back and how to connect to yourself again.
Awesome. Cool. I think that was a good question to start with because it kind of sets the stage for maybe some other questions coming up. I mean, this next one is phenomenal. It's kind of like the whole point of this chat tonight. So the question is, what effect does running have on the brain? Some people say we're running away from something. Are we? That is the question.
Maybe. So that's like as in everything in ultra running, right? The answer is it depends.
It depends.
It depends.
Yeah.
But we'll dive into the last part later, but because it's kind of three different questions. But like, let's talk about that first question. What effect does running have on the brain? So we all know from the time we're in elementary school that exercise is really good for our mental health. It releases endorphins, really positive, feel-good feelings. It helps with focus and mind-body connection and creativity and clarity. It helps with stress relief when we are doing some easy running and using it appropriately. So those are some really good impacts that it has on the brain. as we engage in ultra running and we run really far and we compete, sometimes running can also have negative impacts on the brain. So big efforts, whether they be fast efforts or long efforts, can put a lot of stress on the body, literal physical stress, on your muscles. Those same things are happening on your brain, right? You can't separate those things. Literally every mile your brain runs, every mile your body runs, your brain runs. So you think like you don't work out multiple muscles day after day after day, but we work out our brain day after day after day and never give it a rest. So the effects that running can have on the brain, if it goes unchecked, can lead to things like burnout and injury. We have essentially too much stress on the body and overload of things like cortisol and adrenaline, which are stress hormones. And when you have too much stress on your body and you're not letting go of that stress, essentially you can kind of picture like a bucket overflowing. There's nowhere left for it to go, and it overflows and it comes out in ways like I said, injury, burnout, irritability, brain fog, forgetfulness. So that doesn't mean we can't have healthy relationships with ultra running, or that we can't run long distances and also have good mental health. It means that we have to be very intentional about adding mental health care alongside our running and not using running as our sole support for mental health. So if that, I talked about the stress bucket, if we're pouring that stress of running in, but we are releasing some stress by doing some mindfulness or going to therapy or connecting socially, then that stress bucket's not overflowing. We can handle that running, right? But if we're running and running and running and we're not letting any of that stress go, then the impacts, to answer that question of like what impacts on the brain, really intense. And it can lead to, I say burnout, but it can also things like depression and anxiety. And then things like if you're under fueling, or if you have a complicated relationship with food and running, in the input and output, there is a high correlation between eating disorders and running. Even in the ultra world, where I think we're getting better about talking about, fueling for our runs, but it is not as simple as to say like running is always great for our mental health. And if we're running all the time, that we're going to feel wonderful and great about our bodies and whatever.
Totally. And I think that's something we all kind of learn the hard way when we're starting out with running. Because when you start running and you're new to it, everything's new and exciting, and like every long run is a new distance, and it feels really good. I feel like it kind of creeps up on you without you really realizing it. And it's only something you see when you're on the other side and you look back and you're like, oh, way too much overloaded. But at least in my experience, it's something I see like we all figure it out. And it might be something we have to keep learning. You mess up and it's like, oh, wait, I've done this before. Hold on, I didn't want to do this again.
Yeah, it is one of those lessons that I've never seen anyone learn without the really tough, shitty experience. And I've supported like people who have a loved one and they're seeing the loved one like go hard into the sport, and they're trying to sound the alarm and say, hey, and the coach is saying, hey, and everybody's saying, hey, and the person hears them. It's not that they're ignoring it, but there's really this sense of, I got this. This feels good. Like I would know if it was too much. And that sort of invincibility piece that I think, like you said, comes with the newness and the excitement. But, unfortunately, it is one of those lessons that I think most of us have to learn repeatedly, from the experience of, it's like coming back down to earth a little bit, like, oh, I guess I'm human. I can run these wild distance, and I think some of that's this thing of like these distances that we do that really are special. I mean, I like 5 from any distance. Most people don't run Most people are terrified to run on trails. Any distance that you're doing on trails is like this big, scary, important, big, scary thing, but we can get dismissive of it when we do it time and time again. And we can say, oh, it's just, I mean, how many times, Kim, did you think or did somebody say just a 50 miler for your last race?
Totally.
Right? And it's a significant distance, significant impact on the body, even though your body's used to it. And so it's like less of an impact that it would be on a new person, right? But I think we can dismiss, we forget. And we're like, oh, well, my body's used to this. My body knows how to handle it. And it's like, well, this is a serious thing. And give ourselves some credit for for what we're doing.
Totally, especially if you've surrounded yourself with other ultra runners and that's kind of become your social circle. It can be almost normalized to a fault of like, oh, well, this is just what we do. We run long. And if you're not having those check-ins, it can get kind of dicey, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and I think that makes me think about the second part of this question of some people say we're running away from something, you know, are we? And it's that question, you know, when you are in the ultra running community, like who are you surrounding yourself with? And like what kind of goals are they setting and what are their values or motivations? And because, you know, it's an amazing community that we're in, but we can get wrapped up in somebody else's motivations or somebody else's goals. And so some people are running away from things. I think the thing to really think about this question is that we're all seeking and receiving different things from running. And what we're seeking and what we're receiving are going to change over time. And it is possible that some people, you know, are going to running for maybe like less healthy reasons or, you know, but I think there are a lot of ways to keep it in check and a lot of ways to get something good out of it. But it's important to ask those questions. Why? Why am I putting myself through this? Do I enjoy it or do I think I need to suffer? There's like, you know, there's something to explore there. Who's this for? I think there are a lot of reflective questions that an individual can ask themselves to help answer that second question about are we running away for something?
Totally. And I think too, it's something that's easy to get caught up with. I find in these couple summer months where Western States just happened, Hard Rock is about to happen. And now, like, if you're in this niche of ultra running, we're seeing more live streams happen. And, you know, it's easy to get sucked into it. But I think it's something that we can also be mindful of is, you know, the messages that are being sent out and what do we want to go in our heads. And like sometimes it's okay to like you can unfollow people that aren't really helpful for you to follow on social, you know, even if it's going against the grain of what, you know, maybe the louder messaging is at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And noticing how it's making you feel. If, you know, maybe it's true that at one point following, you know, a live stream got you really excited and it like really invigorated you. And now you've noticed that there's some other feeling that's coming up. Maybe FOMO, maybe I mean, anything else. And you don't feel good. That's information. Like that's it's not a right or wrong. It's what's it doing for you. And is it creating something positive in you or not?
Totally. Yeah. Love that. All right. Should we bounce to the next question? We've got number 3. And just remind me if we need to combine some of these, but this one is, what are some tips to get you out of a mental rut or a low? I think that kind of coincides with Karen Lee had just made a comment on here. Her question was, what are things to stay mindful of during an ultra and how to stay present? So there's kind of some crossover there, I think. But yeah, what would you say for somebody asking, what are some tips to get you out of a mental rut or low? And selfishly, I wish we had this webinar a couple weeks ago before my 51. Things got dark.
So, you know, like anything else, the earlier that you start building these skills and training, the more sort of like muscle that you'll have around it, and the easier it will be for you to pull up those skills in the middle of training. So all the things that we'll talk about, you know, I really do encourage, like during the off season, these are things that what's really wonderful, most run training puts a lot of stress on the brain or on the body and the brain. So there's like a limit to how much you can do in a week. But most mental training puts no stress on the body and you can practice it all the time. And so it's like a great way to get some training in. But so, the very first, I think, most important thing for any runner is self-awareness. And what self-awareness really is knowing yourself. Sounds very basic, but it's not. We, as whether it's a culture, as humans, we're very disconnected from ourselves. How often somebody says, how are you? Oh, I'm good. Right. And that sort of flippancy, we're very much not inclined to take it that next step and ask ourselves really how we're doing. So self-awareness, knowing the signs that you're getting stressed, knowing what decreases your stress, knowing what a level 4 out of 10 anxiety feels like and what a level 8 out of 10 anxiety feels like. It's being able to read signals from your body that are already happening all day long and that you're likely not paying much attention to. So I think the thing that I always recommend just starting with is just checking in a couple times a day with yourself. Meal times are great. Just like, so picking something that's already happening. So like waking up and going to bed, or when you're eating, or on either end of your commute to from work, if people still commute to and from work. Adding just a pause. And maybe you're just checking in head to toe with your body. How am I feeling? Is there tension? Do I feel good? Or just asking yourself, like, how am I doing? Is there anything I need? Right? I'm about to walk in the office and I'm already like feeling like this, right? That's a good thing to know about yourself before you walk into the office,
Totally.
right? And so introducing some of that pause in your day. If you have an Apple phone, an iPhone, they have a mental well-being app or tab in their health app that will prompt you. If you set it a couple times a day, it'll just say, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you can set it. It'll either do random times or you can tell it specific times. And then it creates like a little graph. And so when you're feeling, oh, I've been feeling so low for so long and the world's awful. And then you go back and you look at your app and you see that your graph was actually like really high like 3 days ago. And like, it's just been a really low 48 hours or something. So that, the data itself, take it or leave it, but just the act of pausing and checking in. So it sounds like, what does this have to do with racing? But beginning that mind-body connection and beginning just that, again, just that sort of check-in, familiarizing yourself with those signals from your body is something that's going to really come in handy when you're in the middle of the race and you're interpreting everything as stress or wrong or pain, and your body's actually telling you something different.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll jump to this one because it's kind of leading right to it. But what advice do you have for when you initially start spiraling and negative self-talk comes up? Tricks to overcome the mental defeat while running. So that's kind of where you just left off. First line of defense. What do you got?
So going with that self-awareness piece, I think like tuning into that negative voice, which is loud and mean on race day, but shows up a lot of other times in our lives, maybe in your day-to-day, certainly during training. So tuning into it, noticing it. I'm a big believer in naming this negative self-talk voice. So really trying to create distance between yourself and the voice in your head that's mean to you. So if I work with kids, a lot of times it's like a monster. You've got this mean monster in your head. And every time it's like, the negative monster, like when they talk, I don't have to listen to them. So you could do something like that, or it could be like somebody, like your bully from 7th grade. And every time that voice comes in, we're not just accepting it. We're literally like, oh, that's whatever, Janet, and I'm not going to listen to Janet. And you want to label it, kind of imagine this person like, I don't have to listen to that. Somebody you really dislike, you don't believe in their values, you don't care about their judgment. And so when they have, oh my gosh, yes, like Inside Out movie, just go and watch that movie and do everything they do. That's like literally what you should do for your runs. Um, but yeah, so we call it distancing. So when you have a negative talk, you can create distance via the voice, right? Like that is actually a message from somebody else. We can create distance with time. So if we're in the middle of the race, I'm going to give myself a half mile. I'm going to give myself 10 minutes. I'm going to give myself to the next aid station. And then I will think about this thing. So we want to create distance between ourselves and the thought. So when the thought's happening, it's like all consuming. It feels urgent. It feels like must respond now. So if we want to just create any separation, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to think about this. That makes it sort of like we're bigger than the thought, as opposed to the thought is driving the moment. Saying it out loud, even. Because again, when thoughts and feelings are swirling, we're in that stress response state, and we're not able to access words and language very well. So the act of putting things into language and into words actually helps get us from the stress response to a more calm state, and it activates the prefrontal cortex, which is when we are not sane in the middle of the run, when we're not thinking clearly, it's because our prefrontal cortex is offline. So anything, when you use language and you have to think through something, you're engaging a higher level of thought, and it allows that anxious space to sort of calm down a little bit.
What I'm curious, this is a unscripted question, but what do you think the role is when you have a crew involved, and maybe you're struggling during a race? What do you think that communication should look like or could look like in terms of like what would be most beneficial for the runner and the crew? Like, should there be like, word vomit from the runner when they get to see their crew, like this is what's going on? Or do you think it's more helpful to kind of like have that time out on trail where you've given yourself, we could call it like that time block you just said, and then trying to move on when you get to your crew at an aid station? Curious what your thoughts are on that.
I think it's almost always beneficial to have the like verbal bleh. I would, if somebody's feeling, and now if you're not feeling inclined and you're just like in the zone and you're just like able to focus and not talk about it, that's fine. But if somebody especially is feeling some things and not able to focus, absolutely just like like just say all the things. And I would probably coach the crew to not problem solve and to not like respond much, and just to like allow that space to be there and to just like validate and not, the temptation is like fix all of the problems, but a lot of times there's not really a problem, and that's what the crew needs to be focused on, is like what's really the problem, not like what's this like what, and so a really good crew is going to read between the lines. She's hungry, whatever it is. But I would not get hung up in the details, because you're going to like be complaining about some like somebody blasting their music out of their pack or something, and like that's not really the thing at hand, and so it's okay, she's cranky, she's tired, she's like let's feed it, whatever it is. So I think another thing I think is helpful is giving crew and pacers like this is where that self-awareness piece comes in, right?
Yeah.
I don't want your jokes when we are out on the trail. I don't. I thought I would. I have like
what?
My husband cannot pace for me, because he just tries to be funny because he doesn't know what else to do when he's uncomfortable. And I'm like, no, thank you. But so I had another friend be like, you want me to sing you a song? No, I do not want you to sing. Please, no. But so now I know to like give people ideas, ask me about my kids. Right? Like, I'd love to talk about my kids literally at any time. Ask me about my kids. So that's like a thing I tell pacers. Or so, coming up, or I think about the Long Path movie, Kim, where crew, for better or worse, knew that box breathing was a skill that you
Yeah.
had. And they were like, we're going to use this. And you probably told them that that was a skill. And some days you were like, I wish I had never told them this because I don't want to practice box breathing right now. But it's good for people to know, like, what are the strategies that I've tried? What are the things that are helpful? Here are my mantras. Remind me of my mantras. Here are my affirmations. Remind me of my affirmations. So I think giving crew and pacers very specific things to say and or not say. I had a pacer one time say, we can just turn around if you want. That again, like that would be an example of a what not to say. And so now I know that some people might not know that explicitly, so I tell them. But that really comes from self-awareness, because some people want all your jokes and they want you to sing them songs and they want you to show up as a pacer in a way that I don't. And so, knowing what works for you and then communicating that to your team really clearly.
I love that. Yeah, I'm excited. We're doing a crewing webinar in a couple weeks, and I'm going to add another one because this is a side tangent, but I was just out at Western States crewing a friend, and two of my fellow crewmates, they're married. They, Ryan, you know them, Ryan Thorpe and his wife, Alex. So Alex crews Ryan often, and we got into a lot of conversations about crewing while we were out there. And just listening to their stories, I was like, oh, so many people can learn from their experiences because it's stuff that you learn, while you're out there. And, they've now arrived at a point where Ryan's done so many races and Alex has crewed for him so many times where they know there's scripts of like what's going to happen if things go off the rails and what's Alex's response going to be for Ryan. But again, it comes back to what you're saying of like, these conversations are helpful to have ahead of time, and it's not really something you can figure out when the bus is up in flames and in the middle of a race.
Well, and I think to that point, a really important part of mental training is and this includes like pacers and crew as well, is accepting and considering that things will go wrong. And so I think so many people focus on problem solving so that things don't go wrong, or there's visualization of crossing the finish line and visualization of like a perfect, beautiful day. And we really have to spend time with, okay, what do I do when my shoe's untied and my hands are swollen and I can't really tie my shoes, right? Like that's a feeling that you have in the middle of a race. And if you've thought about that and it happens, there's not that panic, right? Whereas if you've thought this is going to go great and all of a sudden you're like, I can't, my hands are swollen and I'm tired, and right. And it can feel really stressful, or it can feel like I'm doing something wrong, right? If we have this idea that the race will be great, if the race is going well, I will feel great. And if I don't feel great, then I'm doing something wrong, or the race is going poorly. And it's like, no, that just might be a part of this journey, the part of this race. Like you can be having a great race and feel, Ryan Montgomery got like 7th at Western States and he puked for like 8 hours, like it was a tough day. He didn't feel good, but he still had a good race, and I think the story that we tell ourselves when things start going south matters a lot. So it's like, you don't finish the story, right? Oh, my stomach hurts, I'm puking, therefore I can't eat any calories, I'm going to have no energy, I'm going to be dehydrated, I can't finish the race, right? Yeah. Or, oh, I'm feeling nauseous, I need to slow down. Mm-hmm. I need to check in 10 minutes and see if I can drink water. Then I'm going to, right, there's a difference of this, am I panicking and telling myself this story of what's happening, or am I noticing the signals from my body very early and then slowing down and responding as promptly as possible?
Totally. Right? Yeah, that is awesome. And I don't mind being vulnerable. I think that's a part of leadership. But you were describing to a T what happened to me at the 50 miler that I just said. We were talking a little before this started, where I just said like everything went off the rails. Like, but upon reflection, I think a lot of the mental side was because I went into the race just so stoked, and like this was a very special place for me. I was going back on the long path where there's a lot of, you know, important things that have happened to me in my life on that trail. So I was just so excited, and I didn't even ever really think about the possibility that it wouldn't go that it wouldn't go well until it didn't go well, and I had the nausea thing that was happening. And it was interesting because I felt like I was able to draw on those self-awareness tools of like, okay, I'm feeling nauseous. Like what you just said, literally in my mind, I was like, I have to slow down. Every time I get to water, I need to get wet. My issue was I could not get out of the loop. I was stuck in a mental loop of like, I feel nauseous. I don't feel good. This is not how I was supposed to feel. And it took literally, Sarah, it took literally 39 miles to get to the point where I was like, something just clicked, and I was like, I just stopped and started laughing. I was like, this is effing ridiculous. Like, that is it. And finally, like the next time I saw my crew, I was like, guys, this is so stupid. I'm sorry. I was like, I know the last aid station, and like, let's just laugh about how bad this is, and the fact that like I'm probably going to be DFL in this race, which there's nothing wrong with that. But it was such an, you know, and I don't, it's ironic. Like I'm a race director, but I don't race a lot. So I think that was something, it was a big learning experience for me where I was like, you know, I did some of the mental stuff, but you know, it's a different story when you get out there and start, you know, stuff starts to go off of the rails. You know, for me, the biggest thing, I was stuck in that loop, and I told crew, I know I'm talking a lot, I'll stop, but I told crew after the fact that it paralleled depression so closely with like, that's what happens when I get low is you get stuck in that loop of negative where you just can't move past it. It'd be interesting to maybe dive into that a little bit about, you know, the crossover with mental health and issues with anxiety and depression and how that manifests itself in an ultra. But that was my experience. I can laugh about it now, but in the moment it was like, oh, this is real bad, real bad.
Well, and it's not unlike, you know, a depressive episode where when you get on the other side of it, it's like so obvious how low it was, but when you're in it, it's just like, this is just life, and I'm just feeling what of course I would be feeling under these circumstances, and this is a normal and reasonable reaction to the things happening. And then you get past it, you're like, oh, I was like very emotional, and you know, and that actually wasn't, I was not in a good space. And so I think, you know, hindsight is 2020, of course, and that's where, you know, and I think this is really tricky, both in the real world with mental health, and then during a race, where that's where our crew and our people who know us are supposed to hold up the mirror a little bit and be like, okay, like, yeah, like validate the feeling, and like, you know, you're letting you know that like, this is a story you're telling. Can we tell ourselves a different story here? Or like, right, you're in this space, but it's tricky, especially when you're not the one running, to be like, is it really that bad? You know, maybe you're just telling yourself a bad story. But that, I think, you know, that piece, like sometimes our friends can be very helpful with like giving us a different perspective. And that, you know, I think about the self-compassion all the time. What would you say to a friend in this moment?
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel nauseous. This isn't how I was supposed to feel. This is awful. And it's like, I'm so sorry. That sucks to be feeling like that on race. You never know what's going to happen on race day, right? Like we can all have these days, but like, I know you can get to the end. It's just going to be a rough journey, right? Like there's so many things you would say to that friend in that moment. And so I think that can be a helpful tool. You know, what would I say to a friend? But some of it's like, I think about David Roach, you know, who DNF'd at Western States and then kind of came back the next day and said, looks like a little bit of that was in my head. And I actually like probably could have finished it, and told myself that story. And I, you know, it's having that grace for yourself that next day. Sometimes we DNF and we don't need to. Sometimes the mental game won, right? Because it's freaking hard. Because
Yeah.
it's very, very hard. And I go back to this piece in the beginning. Most people don't do this stuff. It is not just physically hard, it's very hard. Sometimes that wins. And then it's about that grace we give ourselves the next day, because a DNF cannot be game over. It's like that is one experience. I think David Roach has done a very good job of demonstrating
Yeah.
failure as a step along the way, and then we'll see what happens next time, right? And yeah, I just think that piece, like, even, I mean, you ended up finishing, but you look back and you're like, oh, I had a bad mental day, and it's like, let's just make sure we give ourselves grace for that.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I was lucky to have, the crew. Dina was out there and Lynn was out there. And so they've been through some of the trenches with me. So yeah, I mean, they did a lot of what you said where, I'd come into the aid and just like, I feel horrible. I can't believe I'm chasing cutoffs and I feel nauseous and blah, 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 everything's wrong. The world is ending. And they were very calm, just like, okay, all right. But like, you're still moving and you still have time. You're not timed out and you want to be here, right? It was a lot of like reminders of, which I found was helpful. Whether I was receptive in the moment, I'm not sure. But, I think when I left the aid station, eventually those messages sank in. So I think that comes back to too, like, the value of having, group of people surrounding you when you're doing these things that are hard and it's not a given that everything's gonna be sunshine and rainbows.
Absolutely. And I think the benefit of prepping your crew, so like, because you do have these folks who know you very well and are very good friends, and for people who are being crewed by folks who maybe they don't have as close of a relationship with, who aren't going to be able to intuit some of those things, the more clear that you can be with them. What are the reminders I need? What are the values that I have going into this, right? Like, if tenacity and doing hard things is a value, then when I say this is hard, I'm like, yeah, like, that's why you're doing it, right? And so, like, knowing your values or why, like, those sorts of things can be really helpful for your crew to help you reconnect to yourself and why you're there in the first place.
Awesome. Well, we definitely were pretty thorough on that question there. So let's bounce to another one. I'm gonna kind of scroll through, see if we can go in a different direction. Let's see. This is an interesting one. I think you could probably speak to the alpine country question. How do you conquer, manage amygdala parentheses fear in alpine or ridgeline running? So I think, our audience is probably predominantly East Coast. So maybe, again, not knowing who asked this or the context of it, perhaps it's somebody who's going out on the West Coast for the first time, trying a race. East Coast, West Coast, very, very different types of terrain. I do maintain the East Coast is a little tougher, but
yes, I do too. Yeah, can't race out east. Yeah. So, yeah, great question, and I think we can, this particular question is about fear as it relates to alpine or ridgeline running. I think we can plug in anything, right? We've got fear of wildlife, we've got fear of running at night, those sorts of fear of running alone, right? Lots of things that are unique to trail running and are likely things that you'll get to encounter. So the best thing that we can do is exposure. So, right, harder if you're going from the East Coast out to the West or something. But can we find some exposed areas close by? Are there some ridge lines or some, more precarious single track where we can practice? So, with most any fear, the way that we increase our ability to handle that fear is we expose ourselves to it little by little by little. And so I'm really afraid of this. And now I expose myself, and now I can, like, my tolerance is a little bit more, and then I'll do this little bit more fear, and I've done that a few times. Okay, and now I'm not so afraid, and I do a little bit more, right? So I was just noticing this morning, I was running with a friend, and there was a snake, and I paused, like, snake, and then I, like, went around, and then we continued our run, and I said, a few years ago, that would have been a turnaround point for me. I
Wow.
wouldn't
Yeah.
have been able to pass the snake. And I just had accepted that as, like, I just don't pass snakes, like, I'm just too afraid.
Yeah.
But at this point, I would have had to turn around on, like, a lot of runs. And I just sort of have built up over many years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not afraid. I still stopped and slowly walked around the snake, but I have less of a fear. I have more control in the moment. So the best thing that we can do is any sort of exposure. Do the thing that scares you just a little bit. Don't do the thing that terrifies you. Do the thing that scares you enough times that it doesn't really scare you anymore. And then do the next thing that scares you. And then part of that is learning some breathing skills or some coping skills so that when you're scared, that you can feel calm in the moment. So if you're doing a thing that scares you and you just feel scared the whole time, you're going to just feel scared the whole time next. But if
Yeah.
you are like, okay, I'm exposing myself to this scary thing, and while I'm feeling scared, I'm going to breathe. And while I feel scared, I'm going to like do some progressive muscle stuff, like open and tense my hands, and control the fear a little bit, right? And so it's both and. You want to practice some skills that help manage the fear, but it's not asking yourself to do a 10 out of 10 thing and then thinking that you can put a Band-Aid on it with some deep breathing. Like it's a 10 out of 10. Like it's not going to work that way. So you kind of have to build up. The other thing is visualization. So if you really can't get on those trails, which totally understand, makes sense, doing visualization where you imagine yourself running these trails. And this would be an example of a time where I would do positive visualization. So not like visualizing things going poorly, like don't
Yeah.
visualize yourself tripping. That's not a time when this is beneficial, but really if you can see pictures of the trails, if you can watch videos of the trails, if you can talk to people and have them describe the trails to you, and do as much visualizing yourself going over these trails. What does it smell like? What does your breath sound like? What does the pattern of your feet sound like when you're jumping over rocks, which you guys know a lot more about. But that can be a very effective tool if you can't physically be on so this is a really cool thing. Visualization is so effective that you can train fine motor skills just as effectively through visualizing them as actually doing them.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
golf swing is like a thing that has been studied. Like people can visualize their golf swing and make those improvements just as effectively as if they are repeatedly doing the swing, but you repeatedly do the swing and you're more likely to get tendonitis or an overuse injury. And it's similar with running, right? You don't have to physically run the thing over and over again to get the benefits if you practice visualization.
Yeah, totally. And I'm thinking sometimes fear, well, probably oftentimes it's worse when you haven't like done any preparation or like I'm just thinking you can find anything on YouTube now. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're going out to, say it's high lonesome. I mean, I'm sure there's a zillion videos now of someone who's got a GoPro and they're on the course and you can look at what they're doing. I know there's people out there who are like, I don't want to prepare for a race. It's better to just like wing it. But I think it's helpful to prep, for a variety of reasons, especially if there's some fear involved with something like this.
Well, I think that's a really good point because what we find with fears is people love to ignore them and not talk about them. Like, what are you nervous about race day? Oh, no, nothing. Like, it's going to be fine. But there are some underlying fears.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's great practice to be like, think about everything that can go wrong. But I do think it's a good practice to say, what are you afraid of? What are you really afraid of? And of those things, can you address any of them, right? I don't like running in the heat. I could never do what Kim did. I think of all the things about the long path, the heat and humidity, I could never do. But so it's like, okay, well, I know heat is a thing that really freaks me out.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do if it's hot?
Yeah.
I'm going to use my ice bandana. I'm going to get this sun shirt. I'm going to right. And so I take that fear and I turn it into a to-do list. And if there's nothing I can do about it, I can't change the weather. I can't, you're right. Then I'm not going to spend my time and energy on that thing. I'm going to spend my time and energy on, so it's turning the fears into to-dos. And if it can't be a to-do, then we're going to let ourselves focus on something else.
Yeah. Love that. That's cool. We are winding down. I think one very cool question, which I know you've talked on other webinars before, brain games, and you've sent out very graciously some resources for us in the past. But do you want to touch on maybe a couple of your favorites that we can share tonight on some brain games, to whether it's fatigue or race day nerves, anxiety, whatever? What do you got?
So you want to think about what is the purpose here, right? So if we are feeling dysregulated, emotions are taking over, what we might want to do is a brain game that involves the prefrontal cortex. We want to get out of that fear place and we want to actually have to think. So for something like that, doing math problems, counting backwards by sevens. So pick a really high number and count backwards by 7. It's a little bit harder than counting backwards by 2s or 5s. Or doing alphabetical lists. I don't know, when I grew up, we played this game in my grandmother's suitcase, and there's an apple and a banana and a card and a whatever dollar, and then you have to remember everything A to Z. Or listing the countries, every country you can think of, right? So something that's you've got to think and you've got to use that brain. So that is something if the emotions are really taking over. If you're just sort of not so much in the emotion place, but you're bored, or you're just not feeling emotional, but needing something to do, counting, creating intervals. So I'm going to go from tree to tree is a great one. Doing, lists are great. I'm going to make a list of everybody I'm grateful for. I'm going to make a list of, I don't know, every state I've ever been to. You can do literally anything. But yeah, any of the, so that's just helping the brain focus on something other than the pain in your legs, right? So if your brain's going to do its thing, it's going to tell you some stories, it's going to focus on this, that, and the other thing. So you're no, I'm going to focus on every other tree. I'm going to focus on these lists in my head.
Love that. That's awesome. We can send out that link again. I know I sent it with the last webinar. I could send that out again. I forget the title of what you had for that PDF, the last one you sent.
I think it's the distress tolerant. Okay, because the last one I sent, I think, was actually the self-care kit.
Oh, self-care. That's what it was.
So I have the distress tolerance one that I sent you a while ago, but I can resend it. Yeah. It's just some flashcards of these activities or these skills.
Yes. Well, if you're listening and if you pre-register for this, I've got your email. I can send that out via Google Link. If you're listening to this, you didn't register, just drop me an email. My contact info is on the website. We can get that to you. But Sarah, what else? Is there anything else you want to throw in before we wrap things up here? I think we covered a lot tonight.
Yeah, I do think we covered a lot. I think just the most important thing is just to take care of your brain as much as you're taking care of your body during the training and racing process. And so, yes, I think we talked a lot about how to train the brain and consider that, you want to train your brain right alongside your body, but maybe even more importantly, it's caring for that brain, managing your stress, doing proper self-care, eating in ways that, support not just your training, but your whole health. And yeah, I just think we can never overemphasize that.
Awesome. Love that. Well, before we totally wrap up, can you share how people can get in contact with you? If you're on social media, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at The Trail Therapist, or thetrailtherapist.com.
Excellent. Very cool, Sarah. This was fantastic. We got through a lot of the questions, not all of them, but I know we will be back with you in August. Actually, no, I think you're in September.
Yep.
You're September 10th. That's right. All right, so we got all that info on our website. If you enjoyed this, be sure to tune in. We've got lots of other webinars that are cost-free for you to tune into, SasquatchTrailRunning.com. I think that's it. Thank you again, Sarah. This was awesome.
Thank you.
All right, guys, till we see you again, keep it squatchy.